Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, everyone, based on your time zone. Welcome in Salesforce FXR. Today topic is the Salesforce CLI plugin. So we have a special guest, Bob Bazard with us, who is going to talk about on this topic. Let me talk about myself. My name is Amit Chaudhary. I'm the founder of the FXR and the co-organizer of the Farm Intelligence Salesforce Developer Group. And you can follow me on my Twitter, Amit_SFTC or FXR. So we have some announcement for the next session. So we have couple of sessions scheduled for in future. So whatever session you like, I will request you go and sign up. So they are very good session aligned. Overcome Salesforce governance limit, using platform event, introduction to the mobile app, microservices, and what's wrong in my JavaScript. So you can go to this URL and register there. Can you go to the next slide, please? And we also have one more announcement, like after a great success of FXR, we are coming to the virtual dreaming concept. So request everyone, go to the virtualdreaming.com and sign up over there. It's a free event, and we are going to host almost 60+ session with 3 different track line. If you are admin, you can join the admin line. If you are a developer, you can join the developer line. If you are architect, there will be a dedicated architect line. So feel free to register there and sign up. So I will not take much time here. So let me hand over to the Bob.
Thanks, Amit. Right, yeah, good afternoon, good evening, good morning, whatever time zone you're in. Nice to be here for the first time on Apex Hours. So I'm Keir Bowden, which occasionally catches people by surprise because I'm better known in the community as Bob Buzzard. That's been my screen name for about 25 years. It's never taken off before, so I've never had to manage this kind of split personality, but I do answer to both Keir and Bob if you ever see me in person. I've been working with Salesforce for over 11 years now, since 2008, towards the end of 2008. I'm the CTO of BrightGen. We're a platinum consulting partner here in the UK. I've been a Salesforce MVP since 2011, which means I've done quite a bit of this sort of presentation in the community. I've also a certified technical architect since January 2012. I passed the review board not long after the beta was complete. It was an interesting experience, and I think, like most people, probably not one I'd be that keen on taking again. And here's a few places where you can find me. I'm probably most active on Twitter and my blog. If you follow me on Facebook, you will see some Salesforce stuff, but you'll also see a lot of memes and things that I think are funny that you might not enjoy. LinkedIn, I've just started ramping up a bit. And yeah, there's my Trailblazer ID, should you wish to look at Trailhead badges, I guess. So that's me. So here's what I'm going to be talking about today. So I'll give you a brief overview of the Salesforce CLI for those who haven't used it before, and then I'll give you an explanation of the purpose of plugins. I'll show you how to generate a new plugin, and then I'll talk about the sample use case for this talk, which is an application which manages a curated set of bookmarks, and I'll talk a little bit more about that. Then I'll go on to the detail of building out a plugin, so how you add commands to a plugin, how you access Salesforce data, both retrieving and creating. Also sharing functions across commands, standard programming best practice of functional decomposition. You certainly want to be looking to use that in plugins, and also user interaction. So that's our agenda. Without further ado, let's talk a little bit about the Salesforce CLI. So here's what the official Salesforce site has to say. Salesforce CLI is a powerful command line interface that simplifies development and build automation when working with your Salesforce org. So very much focused on DevOps, very much focused on helping developers create local artifacts, deploy those to Scratch orgs or Sandbox or production instances. Very much focused on that side of things. But what I want to talk about a bit today is the fact that it doesn't always have to be like that. From the Salesforce perspective, it makes perfect sense, but actually the command line interface is a fully fledged REST API client, so you can do quite a lot of things with Salesforce in the same way that you would as another API client, or if you were on the main website. So I like to refer to the CLI as the developer's multi-tool. When I say multi-tool, a lot of people think of this kind of thing, fits in your pocket, does a few bits and pieces, doesn't do them very well, not particularly solid, but that's not what I mean. It's more like this. It's more of a cabinet filled with a number of tools, the right tools for the jobs that are coming up. So these are the function areas that the standard CLI covers, the standard functionality. Again, you should be able to see from this, it's clear the focus is on DevOps. It's about managing orgs, creating scratch orgs, deleting scratch orgs, and authenticating against other orgs such as developer, sandbox, production instances, and also remembering to log out because that's really important. Creating local metadata, so creating Apex classes, creating Visualforce pages, Lightning Web Components. Sometimes sounds easy, it should just be a file, but actually when you're dealing with local metadata, for example, if it's a Lightning Web Component, you need to create a bundle of about 3 or 4 files. The command line interface takes care of that for you. You don't have to worry about the format of all those files and which ones you actually need. Moving metadata into and out of Salesforce instances through deploy, push, retrieve, and pull. And then you move on to the records. You've got the ability to create, update, delete, and query records. Again, from CSV files, from tab separated files, again, very much kind of looking at doing a single command allows you to create a single record or update a single record or delete. What you can't do is in a single command, create some, update some, delete some, and query some others, which again, you can get a bit more control from a plugin in respect of that. Also allows you to run tests. So you can do that. You can run some tests or you can run all tests and it pulls the results back down. So if you don't particularly want to log in and navigate down the setup menu or go onto the developer console. And it also allows you to manage packages, both installing packages into an org and also if you're creating second generation packages. So second generation managed packages or unlocked packages, you do all of that through the command line. There is no other mechanism as far as I'm aware of doing that, which is, I've been playing around with those recently actually, and they are very cool. So I'm not going to go into great detail about how any of those commands work. If you're interested in that, then there's the Pluralsight play-by-play that I recorded with Don Robbins. You can find that at the link shown. So what we often look to do with the CLI, I mean, it's a lot of the time it's fine. We just want to run a single deployment, etc., or we just want to run some tests. But if you're doing anything a little bit more funky, then the way we normally, or we can easily add functionality around it is to use scripting, where effectively we wrap it up in a script, a bash script, a node script, something like that. So what that allows us to do is to orchestrate the running of commands to be able to chain the operations together and only proceed if the previous operation was successful. So we can build out a pipeline of functionality effectively. And it's also, because we're in a script, we've got access to any other command line executables. So Git, for example, or if we're running in the bash shell, we've got all the built-in commands of the bash shell and all the other commands that might be installed on the particular machine. So this is a typical piece of orchestration for a continuous integration. You check out a branch, so that's in orange because it's the Git CLI that does that. Then we create a scratch org through Salesforce CLI, push the code base to it through the Salesforce CLI, and then run a bunch of unit tests to check there are no failures. Those last 3 all being done by the Salesforce CLI, which is why they're marked in blue. So I would imagine this is the kind of thing that is probably going on hundreds and hundreds of times an hour around the world. It's a really, really common use case. It may be a straightforward script. It may be under the control of a dedicated CI application like Jenkins or Circle CI. So basically mixed command lines, and also there's no point in proceeding unless the previous step succeeded. So if we create a scratch org and the scratch org fails, there's no point in trying to push source to it because it won't exist. So we need a bit of logic in there as well. This is an example of the kind of thing that you do it in a batch script. So it's not complete here, but the first couple of commands, essentially, I've cloned the Git repo, and then I check the, for those who don't know, bash $? Means what was the return value of the previous command that I executed. So if that equals an unexpected value, then I output that the clone of the repository failed. I can give some meaningful information, then I can exit with a code that indicates my script failed. If it doesn't, I go into the directory and then I create the scratch org. And again, I check that, then I can push the source, then I can run the tests. So effectively, this is multiple transactions that are going on here. And at the end of every single transaction, I check whether it worked, and then I move on to the next aspect. So effectively what we're doing here is we're wrapping the command line in a larger piece of business logic. So that's the CLI, and kind of a little bit about how you can do things with the CLI. And before we had plugins, because we had the Salesforce CLI for about a year, 18 months before we had plugins, that was really the only way that we could extend the functionality. So now I'm going to talk a little bit about plugins. Going back to the tool cabinet analogy for that script, effectively I've got a bunch of tools out of the cabinet and I use them one after the other, assuming I don't mess up the previous part of the job with the previous tool, assuming I don't strip the head of the screw or something like that. I can then move on to the next job. So here is the mission statement for plugins, which I think is really, really nice. It's a huge amount that it refers to here, but really, really refreshing brevity, I would say. A plugin adds commands or features to the Salesforce CLI. That's literally what it does. It allows you to add anything. So what this means, going back to the toolbox, I can expand the cabinet with my custom tools. They're still in and of the CLI, so they're still kind of attached to this whole tool chest concept. I can add topics which equate to an additional cabinet tacked on the side. And then within that cabinet, I've got a bunch of my custom tools, my specific tools for a particular job. And really, this cabinet can get as big as you want. The scope is only limited by A, your imagination, and B, the amount of time that you actually have available to build out those ideas. So this is the Salesforce CLI plugins architecture. So all the functionality in the CLI is actually plugins under the hood. There's just a bunch of standard plugins that come with it, a bunch of core plugins. So you don't have to install those. It's already part there. But you can manage them. You can uninstall the core plugins and reinstall them. And occasionally, when there's been bugs in the CLI, that's been the way that I've had to upgrade to a later version. Obviously, if you uninstall the core plugins, all you're left with is your custom ones, which may not be particularly useful. So there's a plugin generator, which is shown in the middle there, and that basically helps you with creating your own. Gives you some scaffolding, gives you a quick start. It means you're not starting completely from scratch. And then there are custom plugins, which is the green on the right. So custom plugins consist of some custom code, and then something that is really, really useful, the SFDX-core library. So basically this handles the interaction with Salesforce. It handles other aspects of the CLI in terms of maybe outputting messages or receiving input from the user. So a lot of the time you delegate to SFDX core because that takes care of a lot of things. But you don't always. It may be that you need to install some local packaging, to get some additional functionality. And in the example that I've got, I had to install one additional package. So you're not limited to your custom code. You're not limited to what Salesforce provides you out of the box. You've got access to the Node package manager, and there's thousands upon thousands of packages there to do all manner of things, pretty much everything you can think of. So very, very powerful, very easy to expand. So Salesforce Core. It's worthwhile familiarizing yourself with this because there's quite a lot of functionality in there. And if you haven't used this and you haven't used JS Force in the past, it probably won't be that intuitive as to how you do things and where you do things, because effectively you're hitting an API rather than just having some additional library functionality there for you. So as I say, it's a package that's available on NPM. It's bundled with the CLI, so there's no need for you to install it yourself. But it does provide on the NPM JS registry, it provides a really useful link to the GitHub site. And that GitHub site then provides you a really useful link to the API documentation. And whenever I'm writing a new plugin, I spend quite a lot of time on there, making sure that the custom code that I'm writing isn't replicating something which is already there, which is already standard, because obviously that's not particularly useful. And in that library, that's about the only place I think you'll find the sort of complete documentation about the sort of thing that you can do out of the box without adding additional packages. So yeah, definitely bookmark that site. So I'm going to do a bit of a demo now. I'm going to show you how we generate a plugin. Which one do I want to go over to? Okay, go over to there, if everyone can see. So the command that we run in order to generate a plugin is sfdx plugins:generate, and then I give it a name. And that name will also be the subdirectory that the plugin is created in. I'm not going to go all the way through this because well, that's not that slow. It does download quite a lot of files and what have you, and that doesn't really add any value, so no one's going to find that particularly interesting. So I'll stop it before it gets to that point, and then I'll show you one that I've created earlier. Right, so you get a nice little prompt, and it asks me basically the npm package name. So I okay that. Description, test package. The author, so that's me. This basically layers into go through the version there, license standard. It also has some nice features in that it hooks into. It gives me an example GitHub repo link, and I do tend to do all my plugin work on GitHub with that repo. So this means that link will be automatically generated for me, and when I publish it onto npm, there'll be a link that allows people to go and see the code, which is really helpful. It saves me having to mess around and do that myself. Again, GitHub name of the repository, and then at this point in time, it's saying, do you want to do this? So I'm not going to. I've done one earlier, and I'm going to go over to that now. So this is a plugin. On the left-hand side, we can see there's a bunch of things in there to help just with information about other tools that I might use. Then we get into the real meat of it. You've got bin, which is where it's compiled to, messages I'll talk about a bit in a minute. Node modules, there's a whole bunch of stuff in there, which is automatically created by the plugin generator for me, automatically installed. This is all the Salesforce Core and a few other bits and pieces. And then the most important bit is source, SRC. So that's where my commands will live for my, my plugin. So what we've got here, when you scaffold the default plugin, or when you use the generator to scaffold your default plugin, it gives you a nice sample command. So under the hello topic, I've got a command called org, and you can see that on the right-hand side in the main panel. First point to note about this is TypeScript. So you'll probably see somewhere things like interface. So that looks like JavaScript, it's actually TypeScript, and everything's strongly typed. So that will probably require you to do a little bit more work than you're used to if you haven't used TypeScript before. Other thing to notice is that the run command is asynchronous. So again, depending on whether you've used JavaScript promises or async awaits, effectively this is asynchronous code and it returns a promise that something else has to resolve. So we're always talking about asynchronous code here. And as we're dealing with Salesforce, we're hitting APIs, etc. So a lot of that will be asynchronous. So I go to the terminal. So this is, all I've done with this is I scaffolded this earlier on today, but it gives me a mechanism of testing out the sample command that's there as well. I'll try that against my example Salesforce site. So minus u Apex hours docs is just telling it which Salesforce org to connect to. So it says this is org BrightGen because that's where I created it from, and this is my hub org ID. So that's basically all I've done there is I've run the generate. I haven't changed any code. I've simply executed the command. I've passed it the credentials that allow me to log into an org, and it's connected and it's gone and got that information. And really, there isn't a huge amount of code that goes into doing that. A lot of it's boilerplate. So that's basically how you get started with a plugin. Right, so I'll move on to the next section. So this is basically to talk about the sample application that I'm going to be showing today. So the idea of the Bookmarks application, which is kind of loosely based on something that I actually use day to day. It's not exactly it, but it's a similar concept. So the idea of this is there is a curated set of bookmarks which are maintained in a Salesforce org. And it means that everyone who logs into that Salesforce org effectively sees the same set of bookmarks. So it means I don't have to worry about people updating references on their browsers, etc. And I can use this for links to documents that may move, documents that may be superseded, perhaps documents that are out of my control. So somebody else might move it. There's no way I can update it to the document itself to say this has been superseded, this is deprecated, etc. But if everyone's using my curated set of links, I just update that link and I know that everyone's using the latest version. And this is a plugin front end. So the user interaction takes place via the CLI. So we're not DevOps, we're actually running and executing an application and behaving as the front end. So there's the architecture. Quite simple, I'm sure you'll agree. The bookmark records are stored in Salesforce. And these are accessed and maintained by my plugin, which is BBBM, Bob Buzzard's Bookmarks, all the B's. And that's basically a plugin that sits inside the Salesforce CLI. And that's really all there is to it. It's very straightforward, very simple. So here's the flow. I have my user, I have Salesforce, I have the CLI, and I have my little plugin. So the user executes, user executes a command. It'll basically be as part of the BBBM topic, which is where all my commands are located. That's the way of ensuring they don't bleed into anything like the force topic or any, into any standard commands. So they're nicely isolated from everything else that goes on. An API request is then made from the plugin to the Salesforce instance. Salesforce instance returns me one or more bookmark records, and then my plugin does some manipulation of that, presents them to the user, and asks the user to interact with them in some way. So the plugin basically is my front end. Without that, I'd have to log into Salesforce via a browser, etc. So that's basically a whistle-stop tour. So what I'm going to do now is give you a little demo of how it works. So I think the first thing I'm probably going to do actually is open the org and just show you a couple of bookmark records. Notice again, I'm using the CLI for this because I use the CLI for everything these days. I think the CLI is awesome and everybody should use it all the time. So SFTX force org open, so I've previously authenticated, and what that's doing is that's saying basically open the org in a browser for me. So no need for me to use my password. So if that's a production instance, that's a really big security hole. So always log out a production instance. Then I have a custom tab in here, which I will find. And these are my bookmark records. Let's take one that blows my own trumpet. I'm in dark mode, by the way, if anyone hasn't seen that. That's the Lightning extension, which was released in spring 20, that you install into Chrome, and then you can turn on a couple of other bits and pieces. So basically, I've got a bookmark name, I've got a bookmark description, I've got the URL, I've got some tags, and I've got a shortcode. Shortcode is a kind of fast way to allow me to access it. So that's what's stored on the Salesforce instance. It's a custom object, very simple, few fields, no relationships between anything, and each bookmark equates to one of those records. So if I find my other terminal session. So basically, I've got all of my bookmark records in there. So the first command I'm going to run is, and here's the BBBM topic. So that's where all my commands live, so they don't bleed into any other kind of list for functionality, for example. So my command inside BBBM is called list, and what this is going to do is list me all of the bookmarks that sit in that org. So what that's done is it's gone and retrieved them, and then it's put them out with a little bit of detail. So it hasn't just dumped the records to the screen, it's given me the information, it tells me it orders them in the order that they come. There's no particular order to that, but just identifies them via an ID. It gives me the name, Bob Buzzer blog in this case, it gives me the shortcodes in brackets afterwards, and then gives me the description of it. So you can see LWC dev guide is a short name, and then there's official Lightning Web Components developer guide. And then if I choose one of these, if I click one, then that opens up the Bob Buzzer blog in a new browser window. So if anybody hits that bookmark, I know they're going to go to my blog. If I moved my blog for whatever reason, then I could easily update that and know that everyone that accessed via bookmarks went to the right place. So that's the list functionality. That retrieves everything, relatively straightforward. Next one I've got is shortcode. BBBM again, shortcode. So this is where I showed on the org, I had sort of short 3 to 5 character names for things. So rather than having to list them every time and to choose something, I've got an easy way that I can say, go and get me the one that's identified by this shortcode. So this will only ever return one item because the shortcodes should be unique. So the shortcode I've got here is passed via the -s. So we're passing a switch this time as well, passing a parameter to it. And the shortcode I'm asking for is blog. So I do that. It will not return me any information. It will just basically say it's found one. It'll open that immediately. Now, it may be that I can't actually remember too much about the particular bookmarks that I'm wanting to access. So we've also got a find command in the BBBM topic. That's where I give it a search term. Again, another flag, another switch, -t, and the term is develop. Because I know I'm interested in some developer documentation, but I can't remember its exact name. So if I do this, this will then search all the bookmarks on the system. So originally when I listed them, there were 4. The Google one has been removed because that doesn't have developer in it. So again, developer guide, developer guide. This one though is interesting because there's no mention of the word developer there. but that's tags. So the tags aren't displayed here, but the tags are a way of just giving some unstructured data about the record, just some references to it. So the Bob Buzzard blog, even though I don't particularly want that in the description, because the description will get quite wordy if I try and put everything that I've possibly created in there, or that I've possibly written about in there. I can put that in as a tag, and then when I search for it, the tags get included in the search. And again, this time around, I'm interested in the Lightning Component Developer Guide. So I choose Bookmark 2, and that opens the Lightning Web Component Developer Guide, just in case you were thinking, have I set up everything just to open my blog? When I do that and nothing else happens, it genuinely is pulling the record back and following the record. And then finally, it might be that I find something really useful and really interesting, and I don't particularly want to log into Salesforce in order to create a record for that. So I could use the Salesforce CLI, I could use standard record create, I could just do filled value pairs, that kind of thing. But I wanted this to be a little bit more structured. So I've got a create command, which sits again within the BBBM topic. And I pass this one a bunch of flags. So -n is the name of the bookmark, -d is the official Salesforce CLI developer guide, so that's the description. -s is the short code, PIDG. The link, -l, HTTPS, yada, 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 yada. U would have been better for URL, but that's already taken with the default flag for the username that I'm logging into. So I thought that would be pretty confusing if I change that. And -t, the additional flags that I'm putting in there. So if I run this now, so that's created a bookmark. And if I go back to my find, so one of the tags that I added, if you remember there, was develop. So if I run this command again, hey presto, I've got a fourth plugin. I've got my plugin developer guide, got my short code, and I've got my description. So that means that basically the next time that somebody goes to the, wants to look at the plugin developer guide, they can go via my curated bookmark, takes them through to the right place. Right, so that is a whistle-stop tour of the application. So let's go back to the slideshow. Right, so earlier on I showed you the sample commands that are created when a new plugin is generated. So what we want to do, obviously what I did for the bookmarks is I created some additional commands. I created shortcode, I created list, I created find, and I created the create command. So how did I do that? So basically what I did was I added a topic of BBBM, and then I update the package.json, which describes my application to say I've created a new topic called BBBM. Then I execute this command, npm run prepack. So that basically effectively builds the TypeScript and makes it understand that I've got a new topic in there. And then I just copy the sample command, org.typescript over to list.typescript, in this case, because this is my original list bookmarks, and then I rework it. So again, let's have a quick jump out and have a go at that in practice. So this is my example plugin. So I've got commands hello. So if I click on commands and I want to add a new topic of BBBM. So now we've got hello and BBBM, and I've got org.typescript. I copy that into BBBM and I rename that as list. And I go to my package.json, find my hello topic, and then I add my BBBM topic to say that I've got my own set of commands that I'm going to be adding here. Right, I do npm run prepack. If I could spell, that would help. npm run prepack. So that's going to beaver away, and effectively it just removes everything that was compiled, recompiles everything. Then I think if I go into my lib area, I can see my new commands are there. I can see that I've got BBBM, and I can see that I've got hello in there. And then what I can do is I can run this. So my new command is there. I haven't had to do anything apart from the package.json and the rebuild to wire it in. And now I've got my new command, bbbm list. It's obviously identical to the old command because I haven't changed any aspects of that. I've just copied the whole thing. That's basically how I create a new one. It's only 2 or 3 steps. Then obviously the more important thing is I then need to, in the source, I need to go in and change this because at the moment it refers to org. It's using orgs for everything, all the example stuff. So effectively that gives me a starting point. It gives me a template for a command, but I then need to go in and make whatever changes that I need to make. Right, so let us go back to the presentation. So there's an example of me copying a new topic. So accessing Salesforce data, this is the key thing really. A lot of what you would do when you create a new command is you have to specify the flags that you're interested in. You have to put in a few bits and pieces to pull the information out of the flags. But the key bits are when you're going to go back to Salesforce and actually do something with Salesforce data, etc. So, spoiler alert, we are going to make use of functionality provided by the sfdx-core library that I talked about before, which is why I say always go there in the first instance. Right, so the everything you do regarding Salesforce data goes via a connection object, and this is basically encapsulating the API connection to the Salesforce org that you're interested in. So getting one of these is very simple in a plugin command. By extending the sfdx command as I am here in the first line there, short code, that basically gives me a property named org. An org manages an authenticated org. Basically, by specifying that I require a username, effectively that means that if anyone wants to run this command, they have to supply a -u switch in order to get access to the username, and that's right, access to the org. Once they've got that, I then have an implied property. So I haven't had to declare a property, but there's a property given to me called this.org, and that manages the connection. Then if I invoke get connection on the org property, as in the third line there, const con equals this.org get connection, this returns me a live API connection that I can use to retrieve and update data on Salesforce. So one of the things I mentioned earlier was that this is TypeScript. So TypeScript is strongly typed. It's not like JavaScript where everything is a primitive or an object and it doesn't really matter what, and you can start something off as an object and then replace it with a number and nothing cares. TypeScript introduces strong typing. So what I need to do is I need to tell it the shape of the data that I'll be retrieving from Salesforce, or I'll be creating on Salesforce. So I do this by defining a bookmark interface for use in my commands. So this matches the bookmark data that I'll retrieve or send to the Salesforce org. And I can then create my SOQL query, which retrieves the list of bookmarks. So in here, it should be very familiar if anyone's ever used SOQL before. I select a bunch of fields and I tell it the object that I'm interested in. And then I can execute that against Salesforce by using con.query. And then the bit in angled brackets is I'm specifying the interface. So basically, I want you to run a query that returns me some bookmark records, which I've defined. And then I pass it the query string. And that returns me a result. And in that result, it will have there's a result.status. But I've removed that for the sake of brevity. Basically, the results that I want, or the records that I want, will be present in the records property of the result. So result.records contains something like that. So another interesting aspect here, you can just see where I'm hovering my mouse around now, the await. So con.query is asynchronous. I fire off a request and sometime later the response will come back. So query returns a promise. However, by doing await before con.query, that effectively says wait until those promises resolve and give me the underlying data. So it means from an asynchronous point of view, my code actually looks very synchronous. A lot of that is hidden away from me. If you're doing anything in a Salesforce CLI plugin, you will be running in asynchronous mode. So you can use await and async as much as you want. Similarly for the shortcode command, so it's a SQL query, and I can just add some a filter condition in there where shortcode equals my shortcode variable. Again, very familiar if you've done SQL queries before, so it's a bit like a dynamic SQL query. The one thing you can't do is things like binding like you can in Apex. And again, my results in my record results rather in the result.records field. Finally, for the searching capability, so I can use the wildcards as well if you've done that before. So basically I say where name is like the % character plus the search term plus the % character. So I'm wildcarding front and back. And it'll also, because of the way the like filter works, that means that it will be case insensitive too. Okay, so those are all the ways that I retrieve data, all very much a variation on a theme. Where it gets a bit different is creating data. So in this case, what I do is I generate an in-memory object, which implements the bookmark interface with the fields populated with the flags that were supplied to the command. So in this case, I've got my local variable called bookmark. That's not going to change, so I've made it a constant. And then :bookmark says it's strongly typed to the bookmark interface, which I defined earlier. So what that means is I instantiate it like I would a regular JavaScript object, open the brace, and then I have name : value pairs. But the TypeScript compiler will enforce that all of the fields that I'm defining there, all of the property names, so name, description, shortcode, URL, tags, all of those exist on the interface. So if I spell that wrong, if I use something which I've since removed, the TypeScript compiler will pick that up and it'll barf. It won't allow me to continue. That's where TypeScript's really useful. It stops you making those really stupid mistakes that you can easily make in JavaScript you don't necessarily find until sometime down the line. So having got that, I then, so I do this slightly differently. So it's not like I've got any DML, it's not like I've got insert, update, etc. that I can call directly. Well, the first thing that I do is I run the sobject method of con. So that basically gives me the domain for the bookmark object. And then once I've got that, then I can carry out DML type operations on the bookmark sobject. So in this case, I'm doing an insert. Could also do an update, delete, etc., etc. That's kind of a key difference from working in Apex, is that you have to kind of go via the sobject and then execute DML rather than executing DML, passing in a list of sobjects and Salesforce figuring it out itself. More strong typing here. So my operation result is a record result. And again, more asynchronous. I wait for those functions to complete, for the promises to resolve, so that I actually get a genuine result of what has happened rather than a promise that at some point in time will resolve to something. Okay, next thing, sharing functions. This is really useful. If you're anything like me, when you start off doing CLI plugins, what you'll end up doing is copying loads of code around, because you'll be a bit nervous, you don't really know what you're doing, you're kind of tweaking things, poking a bit more in, seeing if that works, and then moving on. It's very much baby steps, which is a fine way to do it. But as you get more confident with it and as you start to create more complex plugins, you definitely don't want to be copying and pasting code around for the same reason you don't anywhere else, because you'll end up with a lot of code to maintain. You want to make one change, you have to hit 5 different files. And you also get, functional decomposition is a good thing. And obviously you can reuse that code across other commands that enable you to write commands a bit faster. So for example, in my little bookmarks front end, a number of the commands displayed the list of matching bookmarks and asked the user to choose one to open. So obviously I don't want to repeat that for every command, so I defined that as a shared function. Also, all of the code that accesses Salesforce, I've moved into a bookmarks module. That's not necessarily particularly reused across each of the commands, but it feels right to have all of that functionality located in a single file rather than striped across a number of commands. So they should all delegate to that. Again, standard programming best practice. So the way you achieve this is via modules. So a module is JavaScript or TypeScript in this case. It's code that is kind of included and it is executed when it's loaded. So basically what it does is it declares a bunch of stuff, which can be classes, objects, functions, variables, etc., etc. But everything is local to that module unless it uses the export keyword. Once it uses the export keyword, then anything that's defined there, which is in my case is typically functions, is then available to the command that's imported it. So that's how effectively it's almost like going back to C days where you had include files that will tell you what sort of functions were available from elsewhere. So here's what this looks like in code. So in my module, I'm exporting the getAllBookmarks method. Takes the connection as a parameter, and note that I have to declare it as returning a promise because it is an asynchronous function. So it's a promise that resolves to a collection of bookmarks rather than the actual collection itself. So if something calls that directly, they will get a promise that will resolve to a collection of bookmarks. If they call it using the await keyword, then the promise will be resolved before it returns and they will receive their array of bookmarks. Basically, I can't think of any reason why you'd be not using the awaits along with the asyncs myself. I think you'd always use those two together. So in the command that relies on this function, I import the module via the require function. So this adds all the exported commands into a local object named bookmarks. So I've got getAllBookmarks as the function. I've got bookmarks as the object that function is going to be added into. Note also, I've got like what might look like a relatively, not exactly hard-coded, but a relatively operating system specific path there, but actually the TypeScript stroke node will resolve that correctly. So I can always use the /, but this runs fine on Windows machines as well. So I don't need to basically say if it's Windows, then use a \, if it's macOS, then use a /, etc. That's all taken care of for me. And then finally, when I want to use that function, I just execute the getAllBookmarks function from the bookmarks object, and as I've awaited it, I get back a bookmarks value, which is a collection of bookmarks that I can then go on and process. Note again that I've used const because I'm not going to do anything with these bookmarks apart from iterate them and output some information. Always good practice to use const if something is going to be immutable. Okay, next up, user interaction. So in the DevOps world, typically you don't worry too much about user interaction. You might want to output some information somewhere which can be captured into a log file, but you're unlikely to be asking anyone to do anything. You're unlikely to be asking anyone to choose something, to put some inputs, etc., because obviously that doesn't work for scheduled jobs and overnight continuous integration type of work. But if you're using it as the front end for an application, then obviously user interaction is very important. Once I have my bookmarks, I want to display them to the user and let them select which one to open. So because of that, I need a way to output to the terminal session that I'm in, and also to be able to receive user input, and not just for the user to be able to type something, but for me to be able to capture that and process it. So support for this is provided by the UX property, which again, by extending the sfdx command, I get the UX property. Don't have to do anything myself. So to output a message to the user, simple as ux.log. So if you're familiar with JavaScript and console.log, very much like that. So in this example here, I'm logging the message that no bookmarks were found. And if the user runs a search that returns those matches, this is exactly what they'll get, no bookmarks found. Fairly straightforward. To capture user input, and this is really simple user input, you wouldn't have a more complex way of interacting using the ux.prompt. It's meant for kind of simple, just straightforward, a couple of words type of input. If I needed something more complex, I'd use one of the other node modules that are available and import those. But basically, ux.prompt, it takes a message to display to the user and returns a promise that resolves when the user hits return. Obviously, this is asynchronous. I'm firing it off, and then when the user does something and that has completed, I will get returned the value. Because I'm using await, again, what I'll actually get is the resolved promise, so I'll get the string that the user has typed in at the keyboard. And this is what the user will see. I've run my find, and then there'll be a list of the bookmarks, or I can choose 0 to quit, and I'm asked to choose a bookmark, and then what I enter will go into chosen, and then I can look at chosen and I can confirm that it matches the list of one of the list of available bookmarks, in which case I'll open it. If it's outside of the range, I can put out an error, and if it's 0, then I'll quit at that point in time. In terms of user input, user output, as we all know, magic strings, very bad practice, so we don't want to do that. Ideally, we want the text that we're going to display to the user stored somewhere outside of the code, and plugins have your back here with messages files. So basically, messages files are JSON files that associate message text with a key that can be referenced in code. So this is my utils.json file, and this contains the text messages displayed by my utility functions, which are the functions that do things like output the list of bookmarks that the user can choose from. So the example shown here is the prompt that the user sees when they're asked to choose one of the matching bookmarks. And here's the associated code. So first off, I have to import the messages module. So I get that messages functionality. It's a whole bunch of functions that are available from the SFDX core, from Salesforce Core. So I don't have to worry about the underlying details. In the second line there, I import the messages directory. So that's basically just saying find the messages directory from the base root of this plugin, not from where the plugin is being executed, but from the kind of plugin bundle itself. Then I load the bookmarks, the utils file associated with the bb bookmarks command. So basically that allows me to segment all of my messages by command and by topic. So once that's loaded, I've then got it in messages, and I can then access any message using the get messages function of the message object. And I should probably say messages a few more times, I guess, because I don't feel like I've said that enough. But effectively, messages.getMessage, I pass it the key, which is choose bookmark from above, and that will be turned into the magic string that is actually going to get shown to the user. So if I need to change any information output to a user, I update the appropriate messages file rather than scouring through the code and trying to find where my magic strings have been used. Just on this topic, I'm also fairly sure this is how plugins will be internationalized, because when I've referenced a message and I've forgotten to put it into my JSON file, the complaint I always get is it can't find the English version of the message. So I'm guessing at some point in time there'll be a way of translating and having multiple different versions of those messages depending on the user's locale. I don't have any more details on that. Something that just occurred to me while I was putting this slide deck together, but it feels like it's coming. So covered a few of the aspects of writing a plugin there. So the other thing you want to do probably is make it available to others. It's no good. I mean, it's fine to have things that run on your machine, but often it's useful for other people to be able to use these plugins as well. So how do we run plugins? So when I generated the sample plugin, one of the things I showed there was using bin run. So this is something that comes for free with the plugin generator. So I did bin run, and then I can do this on my buzzer bookmarks as well. I can run it. So I use topic command and all the switches as usual, but rather than doing SFDX, I do bin/run. I do this a lot when I'm writing a plugin. Allows you to test the plugin works, means you don't have to install it in SFDX. Downside to it is it only works if it's got access to the development directory. So you either need to do bin run from the development directory, or from somewhere else you need to tell it the full path to the development directory. So good for development, not so good once you're happy with it and you want to start using it. So when you're ready to use it on your machine, you can do SFDX plugins link. So what that will do is that will link that plugin into your local SFDX. It's quite a nice feature there as well, is that it is genuinely linked and it is a live link. So I've had it where I've realized there's a bug in my code and I've gone and fixed the code. And then the next time I run the command, because the link is live, it knows to rebuild the plugin and to use the latest version of the code. So that can be quite useful. But that is on your Salesforce CLI. So, I mean, I guess you could use that to distribute your plugin. Everybody clones the repo, everybody runs the pre-pack command, everybody links it. It's quite clunky though, won't really scale, and it doesn't work at all if you've got people on different operating systems. Like the plugin that I created is on macOS, and that's got a few macOS specific things in the file system for that. So if somebody clones that, as I did yesterday, I cloned it onto a Windows machine just to see, and then I tried to build the plugin and it errored because a number of things don't exist. So basically that won't work cross operating system, and it's a fairly clunky way that won't really scale on a single operating system anyway. So again, creators of the CLI have thought this through. So you can publish plugins to an external package register, such as npm.js. If you've ever used Node and you've ever done npm install and then a package name, that's going to npm.js. That is the registry that is there. So if you want to do this, you need an account with the registry. Sign up link shown there, and this is free for public packages. It's not very expensive for private packages. So if you've got some plugins that you think are going to be real mission critical information for you. You don't want anyone else seeing what's there. You can get an account that allows you to have private ones and nobody will be able to see that. It's not something that I've ever really concerned myself about. Everything that I do, I'm quite happy for everyone to have access to it. So once you've set yourself up with an npm.js account, from your plugin, you just do npm publish, and the plugin, the commands generated by the plugin generator will bundle all that up, publish it out to npm, builds you the readme, etc., etc. So you don't have to do an awful lot to publish once you're happy with it. Once you're published, then basically package is available for anyone to find. So effectively you've got no privacy at that point in time. Anyone can see it. They may not, it depends on how much you think people are actually going to try and find it as to whether it's going to get used. But yeah, it will be out there. Anybody can see it. Anyone can install it. And essentially, because of the way these things work in Node, everyone will be able to see your code as well, because it's only compiles to JavaScript. It doesn't compile to anything which obfuscates in any way. And then from there, you can install it in any Salesforce CLI. And as I tried yesterday, installed fine on my macOS machine, and it also installed fine on my Windows 10 machine. So for cross OS stuff, that's the way that you get it onto somebody's different operating system. So I think this is actually a really, really powerful aspect of the Salesforce CLI that probably doesn't get a huge amount of publicity, because if your team have adopted the CLI across the board, then you've got a ready-made container for any functionality, for any commands that you want to make sure they're all using. You can push it out to them via a single plugin. I've got a simple mechanism to install it, and you know that everybody else is using the same thing that you are. So really very cool, I think. But we're not done yet. I know that I didn't have this on the agenda, but here's a little bonus section as well. If you're using the CLI and you're a Salesforce developer, you're probably using VS Code. And you can integrate your plugin with VS Code as well. And it's really quite straightforward. So VS Code has the concept of tasks. And this allows you to configure external commands so they can be executed from the VS Code command palette. So you don't need to switch out to the terminal or anything like that. So here's an example tasks.json file that hooks my shortcode command in to the Bob Buzzard blog. So .vscode is in the local directory, so that's my local project directory. And then there's a task.json file. Bit of version information, then there's the tasks. So I give it a label, Bob Buzzard blog, so that'll appear when somebody uses the task, what type of command task it is. This is a shell script, so it just knows to run a command at the shell. The command itself, something to notice here, I've got sfdx bbbm shortcode -s blog, but I haven't given a -u apex hours docs there. And that's because this example is picking up my default username that I've configured via the Salesforce CLI. If that wasn't the case and I didn't want that, then I could specify an additional username here. So if I had a username that was purely for my curated bookmarks, I could enter that in here. The other thing that's non-obvious about creating these is that you need to specify a problem matcher. And this basically says, what do I do if something goes wrong? Because effectively it's handing off to the shell, so we don't really know what's going to come back. So if you don't have this, and this is really simple, it's basically saying just like, look relative to where we're running, and if you see error, that means there's a problem, and it will just display in the output. If you don't have this, then when the user tries to run it, it'll then say to them, what do I do if I see an error? So it basically introduces another step whenever you're trying to run a command. So I've just got this really simple problem matcher that I use in quite a few places. So once I've saved that task.json file, I can then execute the command by pressing Command P on VS Code, and that opens up the command palette, and then I type task. If I type task on its own, it will show me all the pre-configured tasks. But if I keep typing, in this instance, Bob, it will show me Bob Buzzard blog, which matches the label, my pre-configured task. And then if I choose that command to run, then it'll open the blog in a new Chrome browser window, which is very nice and saves me having to leave. So it's just, I guess it's a slightly artificially constructed scenario, but basically if you are writing CLI extensions which do something from the DevOps perspective for your project, you can use something like this to really easily wire them into VS Code, and then people don't have to worry about going to the command line, etc. They can stay in their development environment. So that really is it this time. Here's some useful links. So I've already published the Bookmarks plugin onto npm.js. The repo for the Salesforce org and the code for the plugin are both available on my GitHub. I've also done some other plugins. So there's the utilities plugin on npm.js that shows a couple of real things: disabling parallel unit testing and extracting the maximum API version that an org can support, so the current API version effectively. I did a Dreamforce session on using the CLI, again in a non-DevOps, or I suppose it's slightly more DevOps way, but not really particularly Salesforcey. It was just basically generating a mobile application template to basically as a way of allowing me to say, I know whenever anyone's creating a mobile app, they need to have these things, so I can spread that around as a template that anyone can use. There's my play-by-play link there. And there's also a couple of links to the Salesforce CLI official documentation, the command reference, the plugin developer guide. And then the final link is one from a guy that works for Salesforce, Shane McLaughlin. And he's, I don't know if anyone's familiar, there's a bunch of things on GitHub which are called Awesome Whatever, which are effectively references to where you can find lots of examples of that area of functionality. So the Awesome Plugins collection is a bunch of plugins that people have submitted to appear in like kind of a register of plugins. And if you're thinking about getting involved in plugins and you're struggling to figure out how to do something, it's worth having a look in there to see if someone's done something similar, because I think pretty much all the ones on there, people have shared the code as well. So you will be able to figure that out for yourself. Right, so that is the main presentation. Oops, sorry, jumped ahead there. I haven't done one of these before, so I don't know how we take questions. I'm assuming I go and look at the chat and see if there's any questions. Please, Amit, jump in if that's not the way that we do it and I should be doing something else.
That's a great session, Bob. I also see like one of the recent blog posts from your side, that is Salesforce CLI UI.
Yes, that's a slightly different thing. Again, with that, what I'm doing is I'm wrapping up the Salesforce CLI. So that's an Electron application that is delegating out to SFDX, really because I think some people struggle a bit with the command line. So this was a kind of weird way of like, I think the command line's really awesome, but if someone doesn't think the command line's really awesome, then here's a button you can press and get it to do things.
Yeah, I know like I'm going out of the track, but that is something awesome. I like it. And if you can open the blog post and talk a little bit about it, that will be really helpful. But it's up to you. I know it's like on the sudden I'm asking. Not
no, that's
yeah, but I personally like it.
Yeah, that's fine. Let me just end the slideshow for a moment. Let me find, I know I can open the blog really easily because I can run my little plugin, open my blog, go off to that, and let's go and scroll down. It's been a big month for my.
Yeah, because like CLI is a little bit always complex topic. People scared like doing the command prompt, and that UI is really helpful. Like people who don't know the command, who cannot remember, that will be really awesome.
Sure. Actually, before I open the blog post, let me show you it. So this is my Electron application. Right, so basically what this is an Electron application. For those that haven't used Electron before, it's like a combination of Chrome and Node.js that allows you to do web style front ends, but as an application that runs on the local directory. So, and I've got a bunch of commands that I've configured and grouped. So I've got create and delete scratch org. I use that quite a lot. Log into an org, log out of an org, set some default configuration information. I actually use this quite a lot myself because it's a really easy way of opening an org when I can't really remember the details of it. So if I go in here, so this has got a drop down of every org. You can see I use the CLI quite a lot because I've got a hell of a lot of orgs there. But I know, for example, at the moment, what I've been talking about was the Apex Hours docs. So I do start typing in, it matches that. Because I want people to use the CLI and not use GUIs all the time. It tells you what command it's going to execute, so you can copy that and paste that if you want. Otherwise, I can hit that, and this will open the org for me. And it also updates a little bit more logging information. Stuff that I haven't really, so I can do things like run local tests, get some log files, list logs, The other bit, the bit that I haven't really done a blog post on yet, is I had to do a bunch of stuff around packaging for the App Exchange recently. So I created a bunch of commands for that as well. And this is actually quite useful in that I can, when I do things like promote version, rather than me having to remember the names of the versions that I gave or the IDs, what it does is it connects to my org, and then it asks me to choose a package of the available packages. And when I choose that, it goes and fetches the available versions and then says, which one do you want to promote? So it does mean that I don't have to remember quite so much stuff. But yeah, so I put this together basically because I think some people do struggle to use the CLI. I can actually show you a little bit more about that if I get up vscode. And this is all published on GitHub again. The only thing that probably is different to GitHub is that the commands.js that has the set of configured commands is slightly different. But the way it works is I've got a massive JSON file that basically defines a bunch of groups. And within a group, I then have a list of commands. So in this case, the first one I showed was creating a scratch org. I've got an icon, I've got messages that appear in the logs, what command I want to use, SFDX, the sub command I want to run, whether I want to open the org when I've created it. User means the user gets to choose. Instructions, I've been really lazy. That should have some friendly instructions. A few other bits and pieces. And then there's the params. And basically this is where I actually quite enjoyed writing it, because effectively this dynamically generates the page of parameters that I get to fill in. So I've got something which is of type org. And that means, I think I've just killed that off, haven't I? Just give me a sec. I'll open that up again. One thing about Electron applications is they are just a little bit slow, because it's effectively starting a new browser instance type of thing. But because I've said my parameter is org here and its type is devhub, there's a label of devhub, variant of hub. What that means is, where have I gone? What this will show me here is only the list of dev hubs that I've authenticated against. It won't show me scratch orgs, won't show me developer editions, won't show me anything like that. So in this case, I've only got one, so it's pre-filled that. Then I can choose a definition file. So again, interaction with the file system. That's not going to be very helpful. Maybe trigger will probably do it. Yeah, config. So I can choose my scratch org definition, etc. Whether I want, and as I select these things, you'll notice the command down the bottom expands itself. Open org doesn't go in there because it's not part of it. And if I change that to 30, that updates to 30. So yeah, the idea for this is basically people who aren't comfortable, it gives them a kind of nicer front end from their perspective, but also the whole time is showing them the commands that are being executed and how simple they are, and hopefully move them over towards the using the CLI. As I say, for some things which are a bit more complicated around, for example, packaging, I tend to use this rather than the CLI a lot of the time. One thing I would say about doing this is because it's executing it programmatically, you pretty much always have to use -- JSON to get a JSON format response that you can then parse and determine what actually happened. Was it successful? Was it failure? What that typically means with the Salesforce CLI is that you don't get any interaction back to the user while that command is running. You don't get spinners, you don't get progress bars or anything like that. If you're doing something which involves pushing a lot of code, for example, creating a package with quite a lot of code in it, what you'll end up with then is actually quite a long gap. The user presses the button and it says, please wait, and then nothing happens at all for ages. So you need to make sure that if you're going to do anything like that, your users are relatively calm about not getting loads of information back and will actually sit and wait, because it is quite easy after 5 or 10 minutes to think, oh, has something gone wrong with this? And again, there are ways around that, because this is no JavaScript. You can do asynchronous stuff, so I could fire off something else which every now and then looks on the operating system, make sure the SFDX command's still running, and then just outputs a log message saying still running, please wait, something like that. You could probably get cleverer if you're doing things which return some kind of ID, storing that somewhere, which another asynchronous command can use. Quite a lot of things you can do, but it was really good fun. If anyone's considering doing anything with Electron, a little application like this. I have to say it's one of the most enjoyable things I've created for quite some time. Electron's really nice to work with, and you can kind of build quite nice applications without too much effort. The only other thing to say about it is I use the Lightning design system as well, because I wanted it to look like my Salesforce pages. So that's all SLDS as a local zip file.
Yeah, this is simply awesome. So you're planning to put on Apex as well, or it will be open source?
This is open source. This is on GitHub already. If I whiz down.
We will be glad, like, because I was checking this on one of the day, and this is really awesome. And if you can include one like dependency API stuff in there, this will be awesome. Because I was checking, like, I was like doing one solutioning for unlock package, and I was looking for that. That day I found it. So it will be really great. Like dependency API stuff will become. Because if you are doing unlock packaging stuff for existing client, you don't know where it's referring. If it gives some UI stuff, that's awesome.
Cool. Yeah. So here's the GitHub repo where that lives, and it's really straightforward to install. And again, this I've tested on macOS and Windows 10, and it works fine on both. But yeah, really good fun. I mean, definitely worth having for any developer that's interested in that. Really worth playing around with, and it allows you if you've got scripts and things like that you want kind of maybe admin users and the like to run with the Salesforce CLI, it gives you a way of giving them a kind of a gateway into the CLI without having to actually learn all of the commands and all of the options and all of the switches.
Yep. So thank you so much, Bob. It's a great learning, lots of new stuff. I personally learned from you today.
Cool.
And if you have any question, feel free to put that question into the chat window.
Yep. So I can see we've got some there already. So I'll just go through them. So one another API is we have metadata API, and we currently use it with Ant to push and pull metadata. If you're using deploy or retrieve and you're sending metadata to a developer edition, a sandbox, or a production org, you are using the metadata API. The Salesforce CLI didn't introduce any new APIs. It's just a client around them. If you're using Scratch orgs, then you've got the push pull kind of API. I think they call it the source tracking API. And there's a really good reason why we got that additional API is because it figures out what you've changed on the local file system and what you've changed in the org and manages that change for you. So you don't have to track it and build package.xmls or change sets or anything like that effectively. It's not perfect. It does get confused occasionally if you do major changes, but that is a really, really awesome API. And it's the kind of thing that we've been missing for quite some time, and we've all tried various things to work around that, but the fact that it's in and of Salesforce in Scratch orgs is awesome. I would really like it if they brought that into sandboxes and production instances as well, but I can understand the difficulty with that because some of these orgs have been around for about 10 years and have a huge amount of metadata in there, so how that would actually scale, I don't know. So package.json has a B missing in BBBM under topics, so I'm guessing that was in my slide, so I'll update that before I circulate the slide deck. Is TypeScript the only language supported for writing CLIs? No, you can write it in vanilla JavaScript, but I think you have to jump through a few hoops to turn it into vanilla JavaScript. And actually, once I started learning TypeScript, I really liked it because it's strongly typed. It feels more like real programming than JavaScript does on occasion, less of the Wild West that you can I mean, one of the things it allows you to do is interfaces, right? So in JavaScript, you can't really do interfaces because anybody can change anything. So you could say this is basically implements this interface, and then someone can take that object and remove a function from it or a property, which means it no longer implements that interface. TypeScript will verify that it does implement the interface and won't allow that kind of thing to change. So I think with TypeScript, you tend to end up with, while the JavaScript doesn't necessarily look like JavaScript you might write yourself, what you do end up with is probably much safer JavaScript. So it's another thing to learn, I agree, which is slightly painful. But once you learn that, I think it saves you from so many problems, and it will make your development go faster, definitely. So no, the CLI is an extension to the metadata API. You can think of it like a wrapper. It's a client for it. So you don't have to work with the API at that low level. You don't have to invoke the metadata API passing an access token, that kind of thing. Salesforce manage that for you. So effectively it is like you've got an API client, you just haven't had to write most of it yourself. Under the hood, it's built on top of JS Force, which has been around for a number of years and is basically a JavaScript wrapper around the REST and SOAP APIs and the metadata API and the tooling APIs in there as well, I think. So, you know, it's not, the CLI hasn't changed any APIs. It's basically giving you an easier way of interacting with those APIs. However, because you're extending a client that is already existing, you have to then understand the methods that that existing client make available to you. So effectively, it's just finding how the API has been wrapped. And it does take a lot of the pain away as well. So as I say, to get a connection to an org, extend SFDX commands, say you need a username, and hey ho, you've got an org. And you can just do getcon, you've got a live connection. Then you can run SOQL queries, etc. So exactly the same way you would if you wrote a SOAP client, you just haven't had to write all the boilerplate SOAP client aspect of it. You've just written the little bit of business logic for what you care about, which is really cool, I think, and allows you to get big quick. And those are the questions. Okay, hang on. What are the usual use cases in current SF projects with custom commands, plugins? So I've written a couple of custom CLI plugins that my team use. I generally speaking do a public version of it either before or after. So being able to programmatically or from the command line enable or disable parallel Apex unit testing is a standard use case for me. Because if I'm connecting to a developer edition, I'm going to run all my unit tests, and I know that with this code base they can't run in parallel, then I can just run a single command and that's turned off. I don't have to log in, open the org, navigate down setup, etc. And also it means that if I'm connected to a developer edition as part of DevOps, I can turn it off. I can make sure it's off through that command, so I know my overnight build isn't going to fail. What I would recommend is having a look at the link to the awesome plugins collection, because you'll see some in there. There's another one from a French company, TexI, Fabien Talon and co. And that's basically they've published the one that they use on a regular basis. And that does quite a lot of stuff around package dependencies, I believe. Takes a lot of the pain away from that. So I would say it's basically, if you find that people are having to do a number of things at the command line, a number of things with the org over and over again, then think about whether you could write a CLI plugin that takes that pain away from them. Because if you can take that pain away from them from a user interaction point of view, then you can also introduce it into continuous integration, which might make your continuous integration more powerful, allow you to test more things. Cool. Right, that's all the questions.
Yeah, thank you so much, Bob, for a great session. It's a great learning for everyone. Personally, I also learned lots of new stuff over here. So I hope our attendees also learn a lot.